Hi, today I want to show you how you can add real native push notifications inside of your Wized application that even support deep linking, meaning you can link the push notification to a specific page, and when they click on that push notification, it will open that specific page and query parameter inside of your application. So we're not going to implement web push, we're actually going to implement native push with all the amazing native functionalities. And if you're asking yourself the question, how are we going to do this in Wized? Wized is for web applications. That's true, but we're going to use Despia to convert our Wized web application into a native mobile application, giving us access to all those amazing native functionalities without having to write native code. So if you like using Wized and like using Webflow, you can now use this to build a mobile application and even publish it to the App Store and Google Play Store, and technically even the Solana D App Store if that's something you're into. So let's take a look at that together. Now, as you can see, I already have a Webflow application set up here for example purposes today. I also have it linked with Wized, and I have that set up as a project inside of Despia, and I also have my development account and all of that linked. So I'm already fully set up with that. So now we want to set up remote push notifications using OneSignal, which is a free-to-use GDPR compliant push notification provider that fully natively integrates with Despia. So let's take a look at that. So first of all, we want to go to OneSignal and we want to create a new app within our OneSignal dashboard. I'm going to call this my Wized native app, and the organization, I'm just going to put my company name inside of here. Look at that. And then we're going to start setting this up for Apple. And now we're going to go to configure your platform. No worries, we're also going to cover the Android setup in this video, but it's pretty simple. Now we're going to choose P8 file, and now we need to get our authentication key. That's a little bit tricky to get because their documentation from OneSignal is a little bit unclear on how you get that key, and it doesn't help that Apple has like two different platforms for building applications, App Store Connect and Apple Developer, but let's take a look at that. So their documentation tells us to create the key. So, first of all, we need to know where we need to go. We actually need to go to developer.apple.com. You need to make sure that you're logged in on your developer account and that you have a developer account to log into. And then you see here under certificates, IDs, and profiles, you want to click on keys. Now keep in mind that you can also create a key on App Store Connect, but that's the wrong key. So you want to make sure that you see this Apple developer logo and not the App Store logo on the dashboard that you're on. And now we need to create a new key. I'm going to call that key Wized Push Native, and I'm now going to select Apple Push Notification Service, APNs. And now I'm going to configure it. And now I'm going to go on Environment, and I'm going to make that Sandbox and Production. So we can use it in testing and on the live application. Let's go on Save. And now we can continue and register this key. Let's go on OK. Register. You already have reached the maximum allowed number of keys scoped for production and sandbox. Okay, I've been doing multiple of those videos. You do have a limit on how much keys you can use, so let me really quick remove one of my other keys. So keep in mind that this key should not be issued per application, but per group of applications. So technically, you want to have one of those keys for the whole thing. So you want to have one key for all your applications on this developer account when you're setting this up. And you can re-upload the key in OneSignal if you want to have separate OneSignal accounts. So note that. But now we should be able to create the key. So let's do this process again. Let's do Wized native app, Apple push notifications, configure, environment, sandbox, and production. Let's save, continue, register, Okay, now it's successfully registered. So now we need to download the key, and as mentioned already, the key is quite important because you'll need it in the future. So let's make sure that we save this on our desktop where it's in a safe location. And now we're going to go back to OneSignal and we're going to upload this P8 file. Let's go on upload. And oh, their whole thing is reloading. Let's click on upload and let's drag that inside of here. Now we got that key uploaded. Now we need the key ID. That's something that the Apple Developer Console is also giving us. So let's copy the key ID and let's put the key ID right inside of here. Now we need our development team ID, which is something that you can actually find in the top right corner next to your business or personal name. Let's copy that, paste this in here. Now we need our app bundle ID. You will find that in the Despia dashboard. If you go on publish app and you see app bundle ID, you can just copy your bundle ID and then you can go in here and paste this inside of here. Now you can go on save and continue. And now I'm going to flex a little bit on you. Under all those options, Cordova, React Native, Expo, Unity, whatever that is, Flutter, Ionic, Despia is actually truly native iOS, meaning your Wized and Webflow application, but with the help of Despia, will become a real native iOS application. None of those other things around it. It's the real deal. Let's save and continue. And now, as you can see, we get our app ID and we need to set up that app ID and link it. So let's copy this OneSignal app ID. Let's go to Despia and under settings here in Despia, let's scroll down a little bit and let's go to OneSignal integration. And this app ID will be the same for iOS and Android. So let's go on iOS application ID under OneSignal integration in the Despia dashboard and paste this inside of here. And also, paste the same ID already on Android because it will be the same for both, right? So we can already have this inside of here. Very nice. So let's go back and now check for subscribers. We can check for subscribers because I'm not testing it on a device yet. So what we need to do is we need to go back to Despia and we now need to publish the application with all the changes with the new ID to send push notifications. So for that, let's go on publish app. Let's publish this project for Apple iOS. And now what it will do, it will actually run in this Xcode on a real Mac M2, a real Mac Mini with M2 resources on it. And it's now essentially a robot is opening Xcode and building your application and converting your web application built in Wized and Webflow into a native iOS application with over 2,000 native files. So how cool is that? It'll take up to 30 minutes. Because the robot is doing lots of work and it's working hard. So let's just make a little cut and I'll be back in a second for you with the successful build. So I got great news. The application was built successfully now for iOS. So let's check this out. So let's go on test flight and let's open the application here. Perfect. So now it's going to open the application. As you can see, runs beautiful in here as a native mobile application. And now if we go back and I check for subscribed users, still no subscribed users. Okay, why is that happening? Let's see. Let's reload the dashboard and I build it with those changes. So let's try closing the application and opening it again. Okay, let's see. And let's go back here. Okay, there you go. Now it was successful. So sometimes if you open the application and it doesn't work, give it some time, close the application again, open it again, and then it should work. Usually like maybe there's something cached, so give it like a minute or so, and then it should perfectly work. So now that we have this set up, we can start sending a test message, which is pretty cool. So let's send a message to the device. Let's call this test message. And let's do title, Wized native app. Look at that, Wized native app. The message, this is as a real native push notification on my Wized mobile app using Despia. There you go. And then you can update some things. We can also set the batch. I forgot it in another video I made, but they have it right here. You can increase the batch to 9,999,999, and then it would update the notification batch as well, which is pretty cool. So let's send and review. Send the message. Okay. Let's look at my camera here. You saw, I just got the push notification. There you go. I can't share it on the screen here because Apple doesn't allow sharing it. But the cool thing that you can see is, look at that. I just set the batch. We got 999,999 open notifications on the application. So you can also set the batch, which is something you absolutely can't do in the PWA. That is what I'm talking about with those native functionalities. You can remotely set this even on a user by user basis. So you can also send individual push notifications using the REST API to the specific user, and then you can, you know, kind of like target that user specifically, which is pretty cool. So but we'll talk about that later. Now that we have this core functionality set up for the application here inside of iOS, now we want to set up Android. So let's do that together, and then we're going to test it, and then we're going to talk about doing it dynamically. So now let's actually go back to OneSignal, and let's go to settings here in our account. And let's go on push and in-app, and we're going to go on push platforms. And now we're going to activate Android. And now we need our Android service account JSON, which they do have some documentation here, how you can get that. You need to create a Google service account for Firebase and create a project. So we're just going to go through that step by step right now. So we're going to go to the Firebase console. If you don't have an account, just create an account. And you're going to create a new Firebase project. I'm going to call that My Wized App. And I'm going to go on continue, and I'm going to go on continue again, and I'm selecting my default account for Firebase, or whatever account you're using for Firebase. And now it's going to set the application up. There you go. So now while it's doing that, what we will be doing essentially is we will be getting the service account file, which is something we have to upload here. And if you can't locate the Firebase console, you can click on here, and then you will go directly to the console, which is something that you can just click on in their interface. But since I'm already here, look at that, it's done. Let's go on continue. So now here's what we're going to do. We're going to click on this little setting wheel here. We're going to go on project settings. And now we're going to go on cloud messaging. You want to make sure that Firebase cloud messaging is enabled. Here's the thing. Most of the times it's enabled, unless you're using an old project that was created years ago. So you don't have to really worry about that. But if it is disabled, just make sure to click on here to enable it. Now, and it needs to be the V1, right? It needs to be Firebase Cloud Messaging, the new one. So that is usually by default though. Let's go on now on service accounts, because now we need to create a service account. So let's click on service accounts. It's going to load a little bit. Okay, and now let's click on generate new private key. And now I'm going to go on generate key. Make sure to save the key. That's also pretty important. So let's put the key right in here on my application. And now I'm going to go back inside of OneSignal. I'm going to go on choose file, and I'm going to upload that Firebase service account JSON inside of OneSignal, right inside of here. So let's expand that here, and let's go on save and continue. Now I'm going to, again, another flex. Is it Cordova? Is it React Native? Is it Flutter? Is it Ionic? Is it any other of those junk? No, it's Despia is 100% native Android. It's the real deal. So let's save and continue. Now, as you can see, we already got this app ID. So it's the same app ID. We can copy it, and we would place this right inside of here, which I already have in the OneSignal integration section in the Despia dashboard under OneSignal integration, Android application ID, but I already have that. So now if we want to test this, we can't test because the application is not set yet, right? So what we need to do is we need to rebuild our Android application. So I go on publish in the Despia editor, I go on Google Android, and I'm now going to publish my Android application. And now what it's doing is it actually goes now again on a Mac M2, on a Mac Mini, it opens Android Studio and is going to now build your application and convert your Wized application into a real native APK and AAB that will be automatically one-click sent to the Google Play Store as a draft, as an internal release. So you don't have to worry about it going public. Same with Apple, it will always be an internal release. But it's super simple, so I'm going to make a little cut and I'll see you in a second once the build was successful. So I got great news, the build was successful, as you can see right inside of here. So now we can open our Android device. I already have installed the application, so let's open this now. And let's see how beautiful this works. You can see we got the application here. It runs the native application. I can open the application. So now there is a likeliness that the error message is going to change, but we're still going to get an error message. That just depends on the specific Android device. So if you get an Android message for Android, just ignore it. It depends on kind of like how the manufacturer are working with the callback. Not everybody is, you know, talking to the OneSignal SDK the way OneSignal wants them to talk to. That is the thing, because every Android device, especially Samsung devices, run on modified versions of Android. They're kind of like modded versions, and you know, kind of like it's not kind of like vanilla Android where, you know, everything is standardized, but you know, it doesn't affect functionality. So if you run this, you see the user device is no longer receiving notifications. Just ignore that error. It's usually happens when you test on a Samsung device, but it doesn't affect functionality. It just affects how OneSignal on the dashboard shows you certain things while you're setting it up, but it doesn't affect the functionality at all. So you can just go on done. And now we can send another test notification showing you that it works. So let's go on messages, push, and let's add a new message, or let's actually clone the other one. I don't want to write a new one. Let's duplicate. And let's just send that one again. Let's review and send, and we got to be quick. So let's review, send, and open this right now. Let's go home. We should be getting the push notification. Let's see, we might need to close it again. Oh, nothing yet. Let's see. Let's, oh, I had the application already open. That may be actually it. Let's try closing all those things here. Okay, and let's open the application again. And if you're unsure if there was something registered or not, you want to go to Audience, and you want to go to Users, and you can see that there are certain users. Let's see. When was that one? Let's see. Last session. That should be. Oh, no, let's go on subscriptions actually. Oh, okay, there you go. So you see 10.4, that was just subscribed. You see the other one didn't have permission granted, the one we previously opened, but that was because I had the application open before. But that should be resolved. I don't know why I targeted that as a OnePlus 8 Pro. I don't have a OnePlus 8 Pro. I have a Samsung Galaxy A15 for testing. That's weird. Maybe there's something with their system going on. That's weird. Look at that, because it's the same date. But now it was subscribed. So when you add push notifications to that, make sure that if you already have the application open and you then download it and update it and open it again, it doesn't reinitialize the OneSignal SDK. So close all your tabs on your phone and then open it with the SDK. That should fix the status. So let's open that again. Now we have it open. Let's go home and let's try now sending another push notification. So let's go on push and let's go on duplicate. And now there's actually one thing that we should try. Let's try sending the push notification. If it doesn't send, there may be actually an error with OneSignal that has something to do with some of their dashboard, but it will not affect the API. But let's try resending that, and let's see if something comes. Let's see. Okay, I'm getting it on my iPhone, but I am not getting it on here. I assume if that has to do with how one signal is now doing it with the segments that you're sending. Because if you add a new push here, or we just clone an existing one, if I duplicate this and I go to send to particular segments, and I'm adding a segment that is total subscribers and active subscribers, and then review and send that again. And why is it only saying platforms Apple? That may be something I want to take a look at. I want to send it to all platforms. Oh, that may be actually it. Why am I only sending it to Apple? How about we create a new message inside of here? Let's just create a new message from scratch. Sometimes that's easier. Let's create a new one. Okay, and let's send sample push. Okay, this is a test push. There you go. I'm just going to do send to particular segments, and I'm going to include essentially all segments like active and total. And now let's see, we should be sending now for Android. Yeah, now you see how it includes the Android icon inside of here. Before that, on the other one, because this is the problem. And I think that's important that we talk about that. Remember how we created the past push message while we have not had Android set up yet? And because we cloned that, it was only targeting the iOS audience and not the Android audience. So now this one, I'm going to give you the guarantee this one will actually work with Android now. Let's take a look at that. Adds Android. Look at that. So I got the push. So that's something to note when you go to one signal and you're trying to test those things, right? And you go to your push, and let's say those 3 push notifications here, they have been sent before you set up Android inside of one signal. And if you were to clone them, it's not going to now have the Android capability that you added. If you add Android and you want to test Android, you have to create a new message because, I don't know, it's probably a bug on their system. But that's something that's worth noting. So, now we know. Perfect. So it does beautifully work, and we get the push notification. We also get a badge. We can send a new message here and take it actually from an old template if we want. But because we send it as a new message, no, it still includes only Apple. So don't use old templates. Okay, that's very interesting. We have sent to Apple. And we just need to enable send to Google Android here. Okay, so even if we clone a template and it was created before we had Android set up, it will automatically disable send to Google Android. So you can enable that even when you clone it and send and review. And then it needs to include the platform inside of here. So should you be sending push notifications and it works on one platform and not the other, verify that when you send the push notification, that platforms includes the Android icon and the iOS icon. If not, you want to create a new push notification and make sure that you check Google Android or Apple iOS or vice versa. So let's send that message. And I just got the push notification on my Android device. And now you can see we got 2 inside of this badge right inside of here. Look at that. So now we want to take a look at how we can automate this. Now, how can we do this with a REST API? How can we get the player ID and all that? So for that, we're going to take a look now at our documentation. I'm going to walk you through some examples how you can also do this on your backend. So in order to send custom push notifications to only that specific user from your backend, let's say a background action runs or the user calls an API or you get a webhook and you want to notify the user that something happened, right? So you want your backend to then communicate to the device and say, hey, please, here's your push notification, send it to this specific device one signal. And we can do this by getting the ID of the device. Now, how do we get the ID? So one signal has something called the player ID. That's the ID of the unique device. every device that your user is logged on that supports push notifications will have a unique player ID. And once you get this player ID, you can go into OneSignal's API, so you can see here, and just insert the player ID to send a custom push notifications only to that specific user's device. And what you probably want to do is you want to fetch the push ID and the player ID, and you want to relate that in a reference table in your database, in a linking table, to your user's user ID that you get from the logged in session, and some other key value pairs, whatever you want, and you create this link. So then when a background action in your backend happens for that specific user with that specific ID, you can get all their player IDs and loop over them, or just simply put them in this array inside of here in this API call to send it to all his or her devices, right? So that's something that is pretty cool. You can also work like with localization, like based on the device location, like EN, ES, and all that kind of stuff, where you can kind of like work with language, make it appear different languages based on what the language of the device is. If you want to work with localization, you can do that with the API that they expose to you. So it's pretty simple. Let's take a look at how we actually get that ID so we can target a specific device. So in order to do that, we need to do a little bit of, like a little bit inside of Wized. So I want to do one thing to make it very simple. Let's just go inside of Webflow here, and let's just add a form block. And I'm just going to go into the form block, and I'm just going to have an input inside of here. And I'm going to give this input field, just for illustrational purposes. I don't want to reload the site, no. It's just for illustrational purposes because I want this input so we can inject the OneSignal player ID so I can manually get it and call it manually from our backend as an example, and you can use any backend because I just want to show you the principle on how this works. We're not going to build a whole 5-hour backend application. It's not that kind of video. Unless you want that, let me know in the comments if you want that. But what we're going to do is we're going to add a custom attribute of Wized, and I'm going to do sample player ID input, right? And if you're using certain automations, you could make this a hidden input field and all kinds of things. But let's publish the selected domains inside of Webflow here, and your application will probably send it into a variable and all that. But I just need this to show it to you so you can see what's actually happening when you run this in Despia. And then we are just going to refresh the Wized canvas, and you're going to see we get this input, right? And now what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable. So I'm going to go into the general data store. I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call that OneSignal player ID. The initial value will be an empty string. There you go. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create an event inside of our application in Wized, and it's going to be set OneSignal player ID native. So I know this is kind of like a native action, and I'm going to do a trigger that will be page finishes loading, and then the action will be set variable. The variable will be the OneSignal player ID variable, and then the value will be, and we go to our documentation, that will be in here how we can access the OneSignal player ID variable. There will be OneSignal player ID. You do not need to run window.despia equals get OneSignal player ID : / using the deep link scheme, because starting with version 3, we're automatically injecting that without you having to manually call our event, our kind of like our deep linking handler to talk to the native parts of the device. It's already pre-injecting it into your application. So you can just copy this variable here from the second step of our documentation. That's just the variable named OneSignal player ID. And you can go back to Wized and you can just write return OneSignal player ID. And that's how you get that OneSignal player ID into your Wized variable. And then so that you can see what's actually happening here, so I'm going to click on this input here, and then I'm going to go on input value, and the value will be v.OneSignal player ID. That will be my Wized variable, and actually I'm afraid always that I'm going to do a typo. I'm just going to go to my data store here and go on V, and I'm just going to click on here. Perfect. Okay, let's just make sure that I'm getting the variable. Perfect. And now I got it right inside of here, as you can see. There you go. And now we should be injecting the player ID. Now, what you can do if you want to have something that's nicely to test inside of the Wized editor, you can do one single player ID or example test. Let's do example player ID just as a value, right? So now when we reload the page, it should be setting it, but it could also be that, oh no, it's like an empty variable. That's fine. We would need to make kind of like a more complex if statement. Let's take a look. Let's remove this here so that we could kind of like have some fallback. Let's reload this. And I assume the variable is undefined, right? So if you want it to be really nice, we could do if, oh my god, it always wants me to do return. I don't want return. I want to do if, and I'm going to do if one signal player ID equals undefined, right? Undefined. Then I'm going to return example ID, and then I'm going to do else. I'm going to return the player ID. So now with this code, it doesn't work that well actually. One signal player ID is probably better if we actually apply it on the input. If it equals undefined, it could also equal null. I think the best thing to actually look for to make it more accurate is dot length needs to be greater than 0. But then we would need to reverse it. So let's copy that. If the length is greater than 0, then we're going to return the one single player ID. On else, we're going to return example player ID. Let's take a look at that. I always like to format the JavaScript weirdly. There you go. Let's try reloading that. No, it's not necessarily working. I'm curious what the length of one signal player ID in Wized will be. Let's do return one signal player ID dot length. Let's see what's happening if we do that. It'll still give me undefined. It'll not give me the length if I'm going to set that, because the variable is undefined. Interesting. So, you know, different tools behave differently. It always depends on how JavaScript. Let's do equals equals undefined. I assume because we run this after the page starts loading, because if I do equals equals undefined, it would be either true or false. So what happens when I do this on page starts loading and I reload this code? Now I'm geeking out on all the technicalities. But interesting, it's not, if I do equals equals undefined, interesting, it's not turning that into a formula. If I do, okay, then we're just going to return one signal player ID here to set the variable, and then in order to have some sort of fallback, we would just get it undefined inside of here. But let's see, what we could do is we could do v.example player ID if it's bound on the Wized player ID, and then I could just have v.player ID, or, and then I do example player ID, and then you see we have example player ID saying it inside of this text field if no player ID is set. And I'm curious, if I remove the v dot and I just take the variable, that is something, because it doesn't exist yet on the DOM, Wized does not consider it, which other JavaScript frameworks would consider it. So, you know, it always depends on how they kind of like implement certain things, how certain things work. So you kind of like want to consider that you can't necessarily in Wized, if a variable does not exist on the DOM yet, set it. But what you could technically do is you could kind of like listen if the user agent equals Despia to kind of like have a fallback to make it easier to work in the Wized editor, but we don't need to do that. It's completely fine. This example is essentially just to make it nicer to work with it in the editor, to provide some fallback, but it's not required and it's not needed at all. But I've been using Wized for quite some while. I always like experimenting with all kinds of things and see how certain things behave in it. So now to summarize what we have been doing here, because I got a little bit of sidetracked here, we have this sample ID input attribute, the sample Wized attribute on this text field. So we can set it. We can't see it inside of here, but we will be able to see it in the native mobile application. And what we're doing here is we have this page starts loading, page finishes loading. It doesn't matter on which you run it. You can either do page starts loading or page finishes loading, because the variable that we're trying to set, the Wized variable with here, the native variable, is going to be initialized and set before the Wized application even gets a chance to run. So that is available before Wized runs. So we can do page finishes loading, we can set the variable, and then we can do v.onesignalPlayerID. And actually, because the onesignalPlayerID is attached to the window, I'm curious that if I do window.onesignalPlayerID inside of Wized, and then I would use the fallback, because the window is also available in the browser, but also available in Despia because of its architecture. But if we do the window in the browser, Wized would probably have the default to make it undefined, bringing browser default inside of our application to make it nicer to work with this default value inside of Wized. Let's see. Let's do sample player ID, and then we attach it on the window. And now, if I reload that, now it works. You see, you always gotta be creative. So actually, when I do the sample player ID, so I can have a sample value in the variable, because I think when you're working in Wized, you're working in a web interface, right? And I think it's pretty nice to have a default in case, Despia is not available, because it's obviously not available in your Wized editor, right? So now when we run this in the Wized editor, we can have the sample player ID, because then what you could technically do is you could build certain logic and workflows inside of Wized or inside of your backend that you connect with Wized, saying, hey, if it says sample player ID, just pretend that you're doing what you're supposed to do or whatever. You more than likely won't need it. But if you're building very complex things, you're working with hundreds or thousands of actions, it is always nice to have fallback, because I've worked in projects like that and I know how clunky it can get sometimes. So this is just what I would do if I would be doing this. So let's summarize. We have this input and we have this action here that runs when the page finishes loading. We could even do when page starts loading, actually. It will give us this value faster. So we create this custom event. I call it set1signalPlayerID native. I do when page starts loading. I will set the variable, and then I'm setting the variable v.onesignalPlayerID that I have created, and then the value will be window.onesignalPlayerID, and then I have a sample fallback value, sample player ID in quotes. There you go. And then obviously we have the variable inside of here with an empty initial value. We could also have the initial value be the fallback value now that I'm thinking about it. There are many ways how you can do it. And then only for illustrational purposes inside of here, we have the sample player ID input just like this inside of here with v.onesignalPlayerID. There you go. Perfect. So now let's try opening our application. And now, I got to connect my iPhone again. So let's make a little cut. So now I got my iPhone open here. If I open the Wized native application, as you can see, I'm now injecting the player ID, as you can see. So that is pretty cool. Now I can't copy it, which is quite important actually for me to do. So what we need to do, we need to be a little bit creative now to do this for illustrational purposes. I will need some way to copy this ID. So we need to ask Claude real quick about a question. Let's go to Claude.ai, and I need it to help me figure out the syntax again for the clipboard API. How do I save hey to the clipboard in JavaScript? I should be knowing this by then, but it's always the simple things you forget. It's not the complicated ones. There you go. So it's just one line, pretty simple, but I just need to really easily write something to the clipboard real quick. So let's actually go to Webflow, and let's just add a button. And you don't need to do this in your live application. This is just for us to get the ID so I can show you how to target this specific device only. So let's call this copy one signal ID, copy one signal ID, and I'm going to add an attribute of Wized, and that will be copy player ID, and I'm going to publish this, and then I'm going to wait till this is published from Webflow. And now that it's published, I'm going to reload the canvas in Wized, and I'm going to go on X-ray. I'm going to click on here, and then I'm going to create an event on this button. I'm going to add an event. The event listener will be click, and I'm then going to run a run function, and the run function will copy this text, and I will just do v.oneSignalPlayerID. So I'm copying the oneSignalPlayerID to my clipboard. Now I can publish this Wized application, and now I can open my native application again. I can close it, and then with Despia you have over-the-air updates, which is pretty neat, meaning you just close the application, open it again, and it'll perfectly work. And now as you can see, I can copy the oneSignalPlayerID, and let's hope that works. Let's just paste it real quick. There you go. I got it. I got it. Fantastic. Beautiful. So now that we have this oneSignalPlayerID, we can work with it. So now let's set up targeting only this specific push device with a push notification. So if we go to our documentation in Despia, you see that we have an example on how you can call the oneSignal API to send the push notification. And this works, you can extend it, you can set the batch count to be like 999 notifications. You can add a key value pair of URL to go to a specific page in your application. You can do really cool things with it. Now, for that you want to refer to the latest documentation from oneSignal itself, but we have a little example here that's great for testing. So let's copy this curl, and you can set this up in any backend. You can do this in Supabase, Firebase, Xano. In this example, I'm going to use Xano because the majority of Wized users is going to use Xano, but it's the same principle. It's just a curl command, and it should be very simple to integrate in whatever backend that you're using. But let's add a function inside of here. Let's add an external API request, and let's import the curl and paste this right inside of here. Let's import, and now as you can see, we need the app ID from our oneSignal application. So in order to get that, we actually already have it set up in Despia, right? That's the ID that links to oneSignal inside of the Despia dashboard. So we're just going to copy that from the Despia oneSignal integration section, or you could also get it directly from oneSignal. Really depends on whatever you want to do. I'm just going to paste this in here. And then this is just for sample purposes. You probably want to save those things in environment variables for security on whatever backend that you're using. But we're just talking about the theory now. And then I'm going to put my player ID inside of here, right? Now you want to do that dynamic. You want to query that from your database. And essentially what you want to do is, let's take a look at Wized again. On this workflow here, where I'm setting the oneSignalPlayerID, after I set the variable here, I want to call a request. I want to perform a request to take this ID and do a patch in my database or a post to create a new link, like add or edit this player ID, where I'm saying, hey, this is the player ID, and yet let's relate this player ID with this user ID of the user that's currently authenticated on the page. And then if you do this, you then probably want to run this after an action that runs after you do the request. but you should be fine with that. So you get the ID, and then after you get this, you want to perform the API. But when you perform this as an API call, you may want to do when page finishes loading to make sure that all the dependencies and all the chunks that Wized is loading are successfully loaded and execute with their best practices. So let's actually do this page finishes loading, because if you have the intent of running APIs and performing requests, you want to do this once everything is successfully loaded, not while it's loading and certain things may be missing on the DOM, right? That's something that's important to consider. But then you would perform a request, you would send your request, you would take that player ID, you would take the user ID, and you would then relate that internal user ID, that's your database primary key, with this one signal player ID, put them in a linking table, and then when you query the user ID, you get all their player IDs, and you can put them in there in your backend when you're sending the push notifications to all of that user's devices. So now with that being said, let's just copy the player ID, paste it inside of here. Beautiful. Let's apply. And then we have hello. This is a push notification from Despia. Now we need our API key. Again, you want to put this in an environment variable for security reasons, but I'm just lazy today. And we're not going to set up the whole backend. This is just for theoretical purposes. I'm going to expose my API key today. We're going to go back to one signal, and we're going to go to settings. We're going to go to keys and IDs. And now we're going to add a new API key. I'm going to call that Xano Wized, and I'm going to create. You can also restrict it with IP, but you don't need to do that. Let's copy the key to our clipboard. Let's go to Xano. Let's paste this inside of here. Let's apply. Let's save. And let's try running this. Let's see. As you can see, I got my iPhone right here, and let's run this API. See, I'm getting the push notifications. Look at that. So I'm getting the push notifications. And I can really send lots of them. Look at that. They're all now coming in. Look at that. It's getting more and more and more and more. Look at that. So I'm getting a bunch of push notifications now sent to my device. Only to that device. Nothing is happening on the Samsung device. If you take a look at the Samsung device that I have connected here, and I need to unlock that, you see still 2 push notifications? Nothing else, right? Because we're only sending it to the specific device with this specific player ID. And I don't need to connect my phone again, because you can see it right here, right? You can see how I'm getting all the push notifications right inside of here, only on that specific device. So this is how you do it on the back end, and this is how you get the ID to then relate the ID to the user that is logged in, to then store that in a database, and then once you get the user record, you can get all their IDs, and then you can call this API where you just put an array of all their player IDs, so you can send custom notifications to all the devices related to that user, and you can do way more cool things just by looking at their REST API documentation on all the millions and millions of possibilities that you could reconfigure and set those things up with all the amazing features that One Signal offers. We're also working on custom notification sounds. That's something that One Signal also provides that we're going to integrate into Despia. So lots of amazing things are coming. And now this is your way to turn your Webflow and Wized web application into a native mobile application that runs on iPhones and Androids, that works beautifully. Look at that, powered by Wized. And now you can turn it into a native application with those amazing badges and real push notifications that also work if the device is off and you don't have all the other limitations that web push would give you. Wonderful. So yeah, if you have any questions about that or you need any help with the setup, please let me know in the comments or go to despia.com and click on customer support. And our customer support team will be more than happy to help you with the whole setup. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for your interest in this video and in Despia, and see you in the next one. Take care.